We skipped over 15 and 16 because it's a lot like the 7 trumpets that we studied earlier, and a lot of it is repetition. So we're going to look at chapter 18, which is helping us get toward the final point here of the book of Revelation. Let's see here. We're going to pick this apart and do some good application today. If I can get my Bible open over there. All right. To refresh your memory, and for those of you that haven't been in the class, the book of Revelation is divided into sections. You've got the 7 letters in chapters 2 and 3. Then you've got the 7 seals in chapter 6. And then you have the 7 trumpets in chapters 8 and 9. And then in chapters 15 and 16, you have the 7 bowls of wrath. And the book of Revelation is not a continuous chronological line. It's a series of cycles. It recycles through those things. And it covers basically the same ground with maybe a little different target audience in each time it covers the same ground. So by the time you get to chapter 17, we're focusing in on the enemy of God's people, the one that's persecuting God's people. And so he says, and one of the 7 angels having this 7 vials came out and spoke with me, saying, "Come, I will show you the judgment of the great harlot who sits upon many waters." And see, that makes absolutely no sense, but later on he's going to tell us what the many waters are, and he's going to explain that. So this great harlot, and I just got a picture that kind of describes some of the stuff that we have in the book of Revelation. It says, with whom, verse 2, the kings of the earth have committed fornication, and those that dwell upon the earth have become drunk with the wine of her fornication. Hi there, Nancy. Take a good breath and have a seat. Yeah. We need oxygen here so we can go. Put a little oxygen on there and then boom. Okay. So, yeah. So, we can already tell a couple things about this, but I want you to, if you have your Bible, underline that phrase, the kings of the earth, because throughout the book of Revelation, the kings of the earth is a group that is a steady group that is always in the bad guys, they are the ones that serve and help Rome persecute God's people. He's talking about lesser kingdoms that were under the vassal, under the oversight of the Roman Empire. Oh, nope, that's the camera on my Zoom thing. Which one of y'all wants to corral that Nancy Tapscott over here? Jenny, you think you could do that? No. Okay, okay, okay. Okay. No, you're good. You're funny, but you're good. Okay. Okay. The kings of the earth. Y'all have been pretty good up to this point now. Yeah. All right. The kings of the earth is a set group in the book of Revelation. You find them in different chapters of the book of Revelation. And they're always the bad guys. They're always the ones that are with the beast and they're persecuting God's people. In fact, if you'll flip over to chapter 19 real quickly, flip over to Revelation 19. And if you go down here to verse 19, this is when Christ and the beast are at war with each other. And I saw, this is chapter 19, verse 19. I saw the beast and the kings of the earth and their armies gathered together to make war with the one who sat upon the horse and his armies. See, well, the one who sat upon the horse is Jesus, because if you go back up to verse 16, his name is the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. So that just shows you one example of which side the kings of the earth are on. Okay. Now we had an earlier class too where we went over this next phrase. If you look in chapter 17, verse 2, you'll notice along with the kings of the earth that committed fornication with her, those that dwell upon the earth, or some of yours will have the inhabitants of the earth, were drunk on the wine of her fornication. See that? But those that dwell upon the earth is a phrase in the book of Revelation that's always with the bad guys. It does not literally mean everybody that lives in the earth. It's talking about those who worship the beast in his image. See? And so, just to exemplify that for you just a minute, turn back to chapter 13, verse 8. Chapter 13, verse 8. Caitlin, what does that say?
All who dwell on the earth will worship him, whose names have not been written in the book of life of the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world.
It's talking about worshiping the beast. See, those who dwell upon the earth worship the beast, and their names are not written in the book of life. So we're talking about a group of people that's on the bad guy side. Some of you that were in the very first class, remember I handed you out the characters and the good guys and the bad guys and who they are in the book of Revelation? Those that dwell upon the earth and the kings of the earth are in the bad guys. Okay? And some of you who haven't, lost your homework, you probably still have those one or two, but I can gin up some more of them if you want me to. Okay. So this great harlot in chapter 17, she is alluring those that the kings of the earth, and those that dwell upon the earth are drunk on the wine of her fornication. See, so they're all dependent on her. Then look at chapter 17, verse 3. This is our text. We're basically in chapter 17 and explaining things going elsewhere. This is 17, verse 3. And let's see here. Read it for me, Cheryl, 17:3.
For he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness, and I saw a woman set upon a scarlet-colored beast, full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns.
All right. Now, notice that phrase, and I probably get too deep into this, but he carried me away in the spirit. Well, compare chapter 1, verse 10, where he says, I was in the spirit on the Lord's day, and then he sees this vision. Or compare chapter 4, verse 2, where he says, immediately I was in the spirit. That's chapter 4, verse 2. He says, immediately I was in the spirit, and I looked and I saw, see this other vision. So he carried me away in the spirit is the same idea as you have in those other passages. See what I'm saying or not? Say if you do.
110.
110 and 4:2. Okay. So, and if you're reading this like they were in the first century, you think of Ezekiel, who was carried away in the spirit, and God showed him Jerusalem, or he was carried away into this valley and he saw all these dry bones, he saw visions like this. So now he's carried away in the spirit and he sees this woman sitting on the back of a scarlet beast, see, like you got in your picture here, and it helps to be able to visualize things. And this scarlet beast has 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon those heads are names of blasphemy. And we've already talked about back in chapter 13 how the beast had these different heads and the blasphemous names. We talked about how the emperors called themselves Divine Augustus or the god Tiberius, or, these were names that they took that claimed to be God. They claimed to be God when they were just human beings. So this woman is riding on the back of the beast. And verse 4 says, the woman was dressed in purple and scarlet and gold. She was decked out with gold and with expensive clothes, pearls, and she has a golden cup in her hand, full of the abominations and uncleanness of her fornication. Well, let's camp here for just a minute, and we'll pull all this together later. We've had, on a practical application level, we've had all kinds of debates over the years about what is modest dress and what is not modest dress. And I think that changes from culture to culture to some degree. But if you'll take this verse right here, this is the description of a harlot in that time. See? So what did a harlot look like in that time? Well, in different places, harlots have looked differently, but it's all been some scheme of dress to allure people, And so if you'll compare a couple of scriptures with me, look at 1 Timothy chapter 2. And this is telling women how they should not dress in the culture of Ephesus. Timothy was in Ephesus. Paul was writing to Timothy, who was living in Ephesus, which is one of the cities of Asia, which the book of Revelation was written to. 1 Timothy chapter 2. And go down to verse 9. He says, likewise also the women adorn themselves with modest apparel, with shamefaced and sobriety. And it says, not with braided hair or gold or pearls or expensive clothes. Now notice that, not with braided hair or gold or pearls or expensive clothes. But now go back and read me Revelation 17:4 there, Sean. See how that compares.
And the woman was clothed in purple and scarlet and adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls, having in her hand a gold cup full of abominations and of the unclean things of her immorality.
So you got quite a few touch points there that are the same. So let's boil down what Paul is saying to those women. I think some people today say, well, it's a sin to wear pearls. That's not what he's saying. What he's saying is don't look like a harlot. And in different cultures, that's different. See, now let's turn to another one at a completely different location, because some of this is cultural. But if you'll look at 1 Peter chapter 3, 1 Peter chapter 3, this is where Peter is talking to women in the Black Sea area, which would be a different place than Ephesus and all that. 1 Peter chapter 3. Somebody give Lana a paper. Here you go. We should have an extra one or two. Okay. So 1 Timothy chapter 3, go down here to verse 2. I'm sorry. I'm getting confused. 1 Peter chapter 3, starting with verse 3. Let's go back one more let's start at first. He says, likewise, you wives, be subject to your own husbands, so that if anyone does not obey the word, he might be won without a word by the conduct of their wives, when they behold your holy conduct with respect. Now look at verse 3 there. Let's see here. Jenny, how about it?
Your beauty should not come from outward adornment, such as braided hair and wearing of gold jewelry and fine clothes. Instead, it should be that of your inner self, the unfading beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is great worth in God's sight.
All right. And again, you've got touch points with the Revelation 17 thing, which gives you the same message. So rather than to conclude that if you have anything gold on you anywhere, like your wedding ring, or an earring or something like that, you're condemned by Scripture, which is not what he's saying. He's saying don't look like a harlot. Okay? So, and that has changed from, in some cultures that has to do with having henna tattoos on your hands and your arms and other things, or and I'm saying it's different in different cultures. I'm not saying it's if you have a tattoo, you're going to hell. I'm saying in different cultures, the way you deck yourself out means something. Okay. So I hit that because that was the cultural way that prostitutes projected themselves in the Roman Empire. So that's what he's talking about. But notice that not only is she decked out and trying to get everybody's attention, but she has in her hand a golden cup in verse 4. And she's going to offer this cup to everybody. I got something good here. Oh, it's full of abominations. Abominations, the word abomination in the Bible means that which is detestable to God. See? It means that which God hates. And it's full of abominations and the uncleanness of her fornication. So this one is alluring the kings of the earth. She's alluring the those that dwell upon the earth, those who worship the beast. She is she's a bad lady. And verse 5 says, and upon her forehead. Does that ring any bells? Because back in chapter 13, the beast caused everybody to get a mark on their hand or on their forehead, didn't he? But in chapter 14 that we had last week, the 144,000 have God's name or Christ's name written on their forehead. See, this woman's got a name written on her forehead, and it says mystery. Now, the word mystery means this requires some interpretation. See, mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and of the abominations of the earth. So that's tattooed across her forehead. She's Babylon the Great. Now, the interesting thing is, nobody cared about Babylon in the first century. Babylon has been. Babylon was 600 years before Christ. They were the great power in the world, but they had fallen to nothing in the time of the first century. But she's got Babylon the Great on there. And if you turn over to chapter 18, and that baby's not bothering anybody. Okay. So look over at chapter 18 and look at verse 2. Chapter 18 and verse 2, where it says, fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. And throughout that chapter, you'll have that same fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. So all of a sudden, we're talking about Babylon in the book of Revelation. What are we doing that for? Turn to 1 Peter chapter 5. Today we're in Revelation 17. 1 Peter chapter 5. And look at verse 13. 1 Peter 5, verse 13. Miss Rita, what does that say? Okay. Peter never went to Babylon. We don't have any record of him doing that. But he got killed, guess where? Rome. See, what Babylon was to the people back in the Old Testament, it's the one that oppressed God's people and came and destroyed Jerusalem and took them away captive. Rome was the new Babylon. See, this is code for Rome. See, because even when you go to Revelation 17, the very last verse, Revelation 17, the very last verse, he tells us who this woman is. He says, the woman which you saw is the great city that rules over the kings of the earth. Well, in the New Testament time, there wasn't but one city that fit that bill. The Roman Empire ruled the world. See, the great city is Rome. Okay, so we don't have to wonder who that is. The code word is Babylon, because in the Old Testament, Babylon was the great persecutor of God's people, at least at that time. Earlier in the book, it was compared to Egypt, because in the time of the Exodus, Pharaoh had him enslaved, and Pharaoh was persecuting him, and he was the Egyptians were the great persecutor. Let me show you an earlier passage in Revelation. Go back to Revelation 11. Revelation 11. Now, this was 6 months ago in our class, and nobody even remembers that we even lived 6 months ago. I understand that. But in Revelation 11, you have this picture of persecution. You've got two preachers, two of God's preachers, God's prophets, God's witnesses that are out there preaching, and they get killed, okay, for their preaching. So if you go to Revelation 11, verse 7, it's talking about these two witnesses, these prophets that are preaching. When they have finished their testimony, the beast that comes up out of the abyss shall make war with them and overcome them and kill them, and their dead bodies will lie in the street of the great city. Underline that, the great city. Now compare Revelation 17:18. The woman which you saw is the great city, which rules over the kings of the earth. See what I'm talking about? So the preachers are killed, and their dead bodies are going to lie in the street of the great city that is spiritually called Sodom. Why? Well, it's wicked like Sodom. It's called Egypt spiritually. Why? Well, the Egyptians persecuted God's people, and it's spiritually where their Lord was crucified, Jerusalem. Why that? Because Jerusalem killed Jesus on the cross, and Rome's killing Christians. See, so it's spiritually like those three things. You follow? So it's spiritually like Babylon, and it's spiritually like Egypt, and it's spiritually like Sodom. Okay? But anytime in the book of Revelation where you have this phrase the great city, it's always talking about the same city, the one who rules over the kings of the earth. And the great city is the great harlot, with whom the kings of the earth were committing fornication. Now, picture the first century. Rome ruled the world. Ships came in and out of Rome all the time. They all depended on Rome for their economy, and for everything that they bought and sold, they depended on Rome. The Roman armies were made up of men of all kinds of different nationalities, because every country that was conquered by Rome, they then conscripted the people in that country to serve in their army. See? So the kings, those lesser kings, the kings of the earth, they were all dependent on Rome for everything. See? Rome was alluring them, come drink from my cup, you serve in our army, and we'll give you your wine and oil and let your ships come in and out. And the whole world is dependent on the Roman economy, that kind of thing. That's the way it was. All right, so go to Revelation 17 again. Revelation 17. What I'm trying to do when I go these other places is try to show you why we know it means this, because there are other places in the book itself that says this. Does that make sense? It's different than just making it up out of the air, which most people do. She's going back to chapter 11. In chapter 1, verse 5, Jesus is called the faithful witness. The word witness is M-A-R-T-Y-S, which is almost the same as martyr. Then in chapter 2, verse, let's see, verse 14, 13. Even as Antipas, my faithful witness, who was killed among you, where Satan was. So witnesses are martyrs. And in chapter 11, you have these two witnesses. They're actually modeled off of two guys in the book of Zechariah, but they're two prophets that are preaching at the same time the persecutors are persecuting, and they're killed in the street of the great city. But it's not that there were literally two men.
That's the reason why.
Yeah,
The witnesses that come.
yeah, yeah. They're just on. Yeah, they're getting it elsewhere besides in the book of Revelation. Well, just like I just did. Yeah, it is difficult, but Jesus is a faithful witness. What does that mean? Martus. What's a martus? And Antipas, who got killed, was a faithful witness, and these two guys got killed in the street. They're witnesses because they got killed. See, and so what we're doing is connecting the dots within a book, and they're going outside to all these theories and trying to just make up stuff, and it's hard to fight that unless they'll listen to the book. Okay, so back here at Revelation 17. Start with the end of verse 6. And when I saw her, I wondered or marveled at her with great wonder. And the angel said, why are you marveling? I'm going to tell you the mystery of the woman and of the beast who bears her, who has the 7 heads and the 10 horns. Okay. The beast which you saw was and is not, and shall rise up from the abyss and go unto destruction. Now that's pretty weird language, isn't it? But earlier in the book, it talked about God in Revelation 1:8, the one who is and was and is to come. Now, wait a minute. God is the one who is and was and is to come. But the beast was and is not and shall arise again. But then finally goes, the King James says, he goeth unto perdition. Isn't that what yours says? Who says perdition anymore, Cheryl? Perdition means destruction. It means punishment. Okay. So he's going to be destroyed. That's different than God, who is and was and is to come, the Almighty, right? Who can never be destroyed, who always was and always is and always will be. So why are we comparing those two? Because it's compared in the book of Revelation, because who are we supposed to worship? God. Why? Because he is and was and is to come, the Almighty. But you're worshiping this man, or these men who are Roman emperors who come and go, and eventually all of them are going to be destroyed anyway. So why would you worship them? That's all that's going on there. Okay. And some people are personality worshipers. Be careful that we don't worship any certain personalities today and become worshipers of those human beings, because they're not God. They're just men. And most of the time, they're not that good of men when you get right down to it. Okay. So be careful about worshiping world figures of any kind today. All right. So look over here. He's going to get into all this stuff about, well, look at verse 8. Read me verse 8. Dana, how about it?
The beast that you saw was and is not and is about to rise from the bottomless pit and go to destruction. And the dwellers on earth, whose names have not been written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, will marvel to see the beast, because it was and is not and is to come.
All right. Well, and the last part should be is come or has come. Rome was known as the city with 7 hills, and the kings are, the different emperors, and people try to take all these numbers literally, you know, and they try to figure out which particular Roman kings that we're talking about. And I don't think that's the way to go it, because where is it that he talks about there were seven, but then there was an eighth, and he's of the seven. Let's see here, verse 11. Look at verse 11. Donna Meeks, what does that say? Wait a minute, now how can that be though, Donna? If you got like seven gourds sitting out in your field, or hanging from your whatever that thing is that you guys hang them from, if you got seven gourds, and then you got an eighth gourd over here, and you're going to try to tell me that that's included in the seven, that doesn't really make any numerical sense, does it? Which again shows you that the numbers are not literal. The numbers in Revelation are not, Lana. They are not literal. Well, it just means the seven heads, those are seven kings, but seven is your complete number, your perfect number. It means all the Roman emperors. And an eighth is coming, but he's still of the seven. He's part of the whole, see? So they're trying to, it's code language. But he's talking about, the bottom line is, he's talking about the transitoriness, the changeableness of all the Rome and its emperors and everything, compared with the unchangeableness of God, the stability of God, who was and is to come forever and ever, almighty. They're not God. They're just men. Yeah, go ahead. Yep. And see if you compare the heads and the horns here back to chapter 13. Let's go back to chapter 13. And go back to chapter 13, verse 1. And I saw coming up out of the sea a beast having 10 horns and 7 heads, and upon its heads, upon its horns, 10 diadems or kingly crowns, and upon its heads, names of blasphemy. Well, this is the same beast the woman's sitting on in chapter 17. But see, our Bible study methods, I'm going to tell y'all, our Bible study methods as a church, I'm not talking about the Broadway church, but I'm talking about in general, have been, let's jump around to different passages and verses. We don't know how to connect the dots within a particular book and stay in that book. See, so most of the time I'm just connecting you to earlier or later passages in the book of Revelation itself to explain the book, okay? We like to just jump all over creation, but if you're going to really read a book, you should read that book and see what that book is about. And that's the only way your friends would ever be able to see this, if they would start through and be able to connect the dots through every passage in Revelation and see that this same phrase has been used 10 times and it's always been used in this way. They don't do it that way, see? And until they do it that way, they'll always spin their theories. Okay? So get down to verse 14. Verse 14. And these is talking about all the kings and the kings of the earth that go with Rome. These shall make war with the Lamb. Who's the Lamb? Well, that's Christ. We met him back in chapter 5, the Lamb, And the Lamb shall overcome them, because he is the Lord of lords and the King of kings. And those that are with him are called and chosen and faithful. So you've got two camps here. You've got the great harlot and the kings of the earth and the beast on one side, and you've got the Lamb and those that are his people on the other side. Good guys, bad guys. All right, now look at verse 15. Miss Crow, how about reading that verse 15?
It said to me, the waters you saw where the prostitute said, are peoples, multitudes, nations, and languages.
Okay, I'm going to see if any of this sank in. There's an Old Testament book where that phrase is used over and over again about the peoples and nations and languages? Katie, you remember what one? Daniel. Now that little girl's been listening. It's the book of Daniel. So the book of Daniel talks about old King Nebuchadnezzar and how he ruled over all peoples, nations, and languages. And it talks about the next king, and he's king over peoples, nations, and languages. Talks about Jesus, who's going to come someday, and he'll have dominion that'll never end over all peoples, nations, and languages. Talking about great kings and kingdoms. All right.
What was the last verse you guys was reading? 15
Verse 15,
in chapter
17. All right. Let's go down to verse 16 and read to the end there, Shauna.
And the 10 horns which you saw, the beast, these will hate the harlot, and will make her desolate and naked, and will eat her flesh, and will burn her up with fire. For God has put it in their hearts to execute his purpose by having accomplished purpose, and by giving their kingdom to the beast until the words of God should be fulfilled.
All right, so see, the kings of the earth up to this time have been serving the great harlot and doing whatever she wants them to do, and they've been subjects of the great harlot, but sooner or later, they're going to turn against her. Now, if you read how the Roman Empire fell, all these other nations turned against her and tore her apart. See? And so that's what's going to happen. Then verse 18 is the most important verse of the chapter. The woman which you saw is, underline it again, the great city. See, that's the same city, Lena, that killed those two preachers in chapter 11. It's the great city which rules over the kings of the earth. Now, your friends might want to say, well, that's Peking, or that's Beijing. China. Yeah. And the funny thing is that in each generation, not funny, haha, but funny, sad. If you go back in history, every generation that has taken the approach that your friends have said, whatever big enemy city was there at that time, they've said that's the city it is. And they've tried to make it a modern city and a modern thing, and it never was. It was always talking about Rome. Now, let's sweep this into a pile. There are two women, mainly in the book of Revelation. One is that pregnant woman of chapter 12. And the dragon was trying to persecute her, remember? And the dragon tried to eat up her baby, but failed. That's the woman that had a crown of how many stars? 12. And everything 12 in the book of Revelation belongs to God. And she was a beautiful woman. And God had a place prepared for her to nurture her and protect her during the same time of the great persecution. Say, that's God's people. But then you've got the great harlot. Okay? So God's people, the great harlot, those are the two women of the book of Revelation. And we studied about the bad one. Now, I hate chapters, because say to yourself when you're studying the Bible, chapters do not exist. Chapters do not exist, because chapters were never in the Bible till the 1500s. They're not part of the Bible. That's just some man's way of breaking it down, and it's often wrong. Okay? So the discussion of the Babylon, the great city that rules over the kings of the earth, hasn't ended. It's going to keep on going in chapter 18, which we're going to study next time, the fall of Babylon. Now, here's how we're going to do some application. Some of y'all may want to skip this one. What happens when great nations like Rome, which are wicked, what happens when they fall? Who all is affected when they fall? And what is it like for those people that put all their faith in that nation instead of putting their faith in God? And then all of y'all and me too, we have to ask ourselves, now, am I putting my faith in a nation when I ought to be putting my faith in God? Okay. Like I say, some of y'all might want to skip this one next time. But we'll try it again, Lord willing, next week.